I was driving past my son-in-law's house and decided to check on him, but when I saw my wife's car at the gate, a shiny blue SUV that should have been in our garage, my heart clenched with a premonition of trouble. Something's wrong, I thought, and I quietly approached the window, trying not to give myself away. What I heard inside destroyed and changed my world forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Her blue SUV shouldn't have been there, not in front of my daughter's house. Not at noon on a Thursday. The engine was still warm, sunlight glinting off the license plate I'd renewed for her last month. I remember thinking how clean it looked, like gilt polished into metal. For a second I told myself there had to be a reason. Maybe she'd dropped something off, maybe she was helping Lydia with the kids. But then I saw the blinds move. Not my daughter. A man's shadow. Taller. Broader. Familiar. And that's when my chest tightened, not from anger yet, but from recognition, because that silhouette belonged to my son-in-law Dylan, and my wife was inside, talking, laughing, conspiring. The compass on my dashboard twitched its needle, jerking away from north, as if it too refused to believe what it was seeing. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The heat inside the car pressed against my face, but I couldn't roll the window down. I couldn't breathe either. After 37 years of marriage, I thought I knew every place Clara could be, every reason she'd give, but that driveway wasn't one of them. Lydia's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in the newer part of Santa Fe, with pale adobe walls and silver sage in the front yard. I'd helped Dylan build that front porch myself, every nail measured, every board lined straight. Seeing Clara's car there was like finding my own name carved into a gravestone I hadn't ordered. I turned off the ignition. The silence hit me harder than the engine's roar ever could. In the quiet, you hear what you're not supposed to: footsteps on tile, a faint laugh. Clara's laugh. It floated through the heat light and rehearsed a sound that used to mean home. Now it meant something else entirely. I stepped out, careful not to close the door too hard. The smell of sun-baked asphalt filled my lungs. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked closer. The living room window was half open. The blinds tilted just enough to catch fragments of sound. At first it was just words, harmless words, estate planning signatures, paperwork. But the tone was wrong. It wasn't the tone of my wife speaking to her daughter's husband. It was a strategy. It was planned. Dylan's voice carried low, firm. Once he signs, it's done. Then Clara, softer, almost tender. He still thinks love means loyalty. The words slid under my skin like cold wire. I backed away, heart hammering the desert air, suddenly too thin to breathe. For years I'd carried that compass on my dashboard, a relic from my father. He used to say it never lied. That day it spun aimlessly, the needle shivering like it couldn't find its way home either. I wanted to storm in to demand an explanation, but 30 years in the military teaches a man the value of patience. You don't rush into a minefield just because your pride tells you to. You wait, you observe, you remember. So I stayed there behind the line of mesquite bushes, listening to fragments carried by the wind. Something about a property transfer, about liquidating assets before July. My name came up once, followed by laughter that felt rehearsed, practiced like an inside joke I was too foolish to understand. The breeze picked up, carrying dust that stung my eyes. For a moment I blamed the sting on the sand, not the betrayal settling in. Inside, Dylan's tone shifted. He talked about how courts favored spouses who appeared cooperative, how I'd never suspect a thing until the papers hit the table. Clara laughed again, that same polite social laugh she used at charity events. I realized she wasn't just playing a part out there. She'd been rehearsing for years. I took out my phone. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from control breaking through calm. I opened the recorder and let it run, keeping it close to the window ledge. Each word, each false whisper would be another brick I could use later. The more I listened, the more detached I became. They weren't talking about a man. They were discussing an account, a calculation. He trusts me completely, Clara said. He signs whatever I put in front of him. Dylan replied, perfect. Once it's in my firm's trust, the rest's a formality. A formality. 37 years reduced to a legal formality. Something inside me went still. Not dead, just quiet, like a switch turned off. I stepped back, retrieving my phone before it could catch light from the sun. From where I stood, I could see through the window a glimpse of her, the edge of her hair, the sleeve of her cream blouse, the same one I bought her for our anniversary dinner 2 months ago. She was smiling. Not the kind that reaches the eyes, but the polite smile of a woman who's already rewritten her future. I wondered how long she'd been planning this. Maybe since Lydia's wedding, when Dylan joined the family, she suddenly took an interest in business management. She'd ask questions then, too, about company shares and property deeds. I thought she was being supportive. Maybe she was just taking notes. I walked back to my truck, every step measured steady. Inside, the air felt heavier now. The compass needle still spun, twitching. I pressed my palm against it until it steadied, a pointless act, but one that kept my hands from shaking. When I finally started the engine, the noise startled a few birds off the fence. No one inside came to the window this time. They probably thought the old man next door had driven by, nothing more. I pulled away slowly, eyes on the rearview mirror. The house shrank behind me, sunlight bouncing off the SUV like a signal flare. The same car I'd washed for her every Sunday. The same car she'd once said smelled like me because of the cologne I kept in the glove box. Now it just smelled like lies. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every intersection was a question, every red light a memory flashing unwanted. I caught myself rehearsing what I'd say when she got home, then erasing it before the sentence ended. Confrontation would get me emotional. Strategy would get me the truth. The compass glowed faintly in the fading sun, its glass cracked from years of heat. My father had given it to me the day I left for the Air Force. He said, "Keep your bearings, Ray. When things spin out, trust the needle." That afternoon, it spun the way I felt inside, off course, directionless, waiting for calm. By the time I reached the gate of our house, the desert light had turned copper. The garage door opened to a silence that felt staged, like the world holding its breath. Her gardening gloves hung neatly on their hook. Her shoes were gone. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the tick of the wall clock. 5 minutes. 10. The sound grew louder, sharper, until it felt like it was marking down the moments of my own foolishness. When Clara finally walked in around 4, she smiled like nothing had happened. A kiss on the cheek, a faint scent of perfume that didn't belong to our home. I smiled back because men like me don't explode. We absorb. We watch. We store everything carefully, like classified files waiting for declassification. She asked how my day was. I said uneventful. She mentioned visiting Lydia, how the kids had missed me. I nodded, pretending to believe. The compass on the counter caught a sliver of sunlight and flashed across her face. For a moment, her expression faltered just slightly. I memorized that. She poured herself a glass of wine, humming a song I didn't recognize. I excused myself to the workshop out back, telling her I needed to check a faulty circuit. In truth, I just needed the silence again. Out there, surrounded by tools and sawdust, I opened my phone and replayed the recording. Their voices came through crisp, undeniable. Dylan's arrogance. Clara's calm cruelty. Once he signs, it's done. He still thinks love means loyalty. The words played twice before I stopped them. I didn't want to hear them again tonight. I wanted them to echo quietly until they built something stronger than pain. Outside, the desert wind rose, rustling the dried leaves piled against the shed. Somewhere a gate creaked long and low, the sound of something opening or ending, I couldn't tell which. I placed the compass on the workbench, its needle trembling under the flicker of the bulb. Then I whispered, almost to myself, that tomorrow I would find North again, and I would do it without her. I used to think love was measured by what you build together. For most of my life, that felt true. I had a pencil in my hand and a partner who said she believed in lines that held corners, that squared roofs that did not leak. The way I remember it, every good day began with a sketch and ended with a promise. We had a habit in those early years. After supper, we cleared the table and pulled out tracing paper. I would draw a wall, and Clara would move it a little, the way she moved furniture when company came. A small correction that somehow made the whole room breathe. She liked to sit cross-legged on the floor with a mug of tea and keep count of outlets and windows. I liked to pretend I minded her interfering. The truth was, I did not. It felt like a duet. It felt like a future. Back then, I still wore the watch from my last Air Force posting and woke at 5 whether I needed to or not. We lived in a small rental near the community college. The heater clicked and wheezed in winter. In summer, the bedroom was a box of heat. We did not complain. We kept a jar for change and called it the foundation fund. When we finally had had enough for a lot at the edge of town, Clara cried in the car and I stared straight ahead so I would not start. I told her the soil test looked decent. She said the sky looked better. The first house I ever drew for us is still in a cardboard tube under my workbench. The paper has yellowed at the edges. When I unroll it, the corners curl up like old leaves. The lines of the master bedroom are still dark where I pressed harder as if I could thicken the walls enough to hold a family in place. The living room lines are pale now. They faded from sunlight and years of being left near the window. That room once held the loudest laughter. You can almost hear it if you look long enough. You can almost hear Lydia chasing a balloon, Clara correcting my heavy hand with the pencil, the three of us crowded on a second-hand sofa that sagged in the middle. I met Clara at the city planning office while filing a permit for a porch. She had her hair pulled back and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She was not trained as an architect. She was good with forms, with people, with noticing what others missed. She caught an error on my site plan and smiled when she explained it. "You build things that last," she said. "So will we," I said back before I had any right to speak in plurals. We went for coffee after that meeting, and later we stopped pretending it was about paperwork. We drove to building sites on Sundays and walked through frames that other men had raised. She held my hand and talked about windows that would catch morning light. She talked about a long table and chairs that matched. She talked about the kind of quiet that makes a person feel safe. There are still pencil smudges on photographs from those days. I used to set drawings on the kitchen counter and mark measurements in the margins of Lydia's report cards. When we finally moved into the house I had built, we threw a mattress on the floor of the master bedroom and slept without curtains for 3 nights. The neighbor's porch light made a low square of gold on our wall. I remember thinking it looked like a promise. I remember thinking I had done my job. Years folded and unfolded. Some were smooth, some were not. We had grief we did not talk about often. We had a winter where work slowed and I took jobs I would not take now. We had a summer when Lydia got sick and I slept on a plastic chair at the hospital and learned how to smile while waiting for results. Through it all, I measured wood and Clara measured people. She knew when to call my mother. She knew when to leave me alone. We built a life that looked decent from the sidewalk. That matters more than people admit. Some evenings, even after Lydia married and moved across town, Clara still pulled the old blueprint from the tube and laid it on the table. She would laugh at how small the pantry looked on paper and how low the ceiling would feel to us now. She would say we should have added a window near the stairs, just a narrow one for light. I would say it is a little late for that. She would shrug and trace the bedroom outline with her finger like a person remembering a song. I keep trying to find the exact day the lines began to lift. There was no grand storm, no broken door. If I am honest, the change came softly. It came as a suggestion. A conversation over eggs. "We should review the retirement documents," she said one Saturday morning. "You know, while we are both still sharp." The way she said it was practical and kind. I nodded and reached for the jam. She added that maybe we should consider a co-signer for certain accounts in case I was traveling or unreachable. She mentioned my old habit of getting lost in a job and forgetting to check my phone. She smiled and said it would make things easier for everyone. I hear that sentence in a different key now. At the time, I only heard care. The kind of care that organizes the drawer where you keep batteries. The kind of care that notices the small noises your truck makes and schedules service before the belt fails. I put the forms in a folder and left them on my desk. Weeks later, she reminded me. I told her I would get to them after I closed out a renovation project. More weeks passed. She reminded me again. Her tone was still soft, but there was a new edge under it. I said so soon. She said it would help Lydia plan since grandchildren changed things and wondered if Dylan could refer a good estate attorney to give us a second opinion. I am not proud of what I missed. She had always been the one to send holiday cards on time and remember birthdays and keep our file boxes labeled. It did not feel strange that she wanted documents updated. It did not feel strange that she used words like beneficiary and durable authorization with the ease of someone who reads directions and follows them. I built walls. She built systems. I let her. Looking back, I remember a night at the dining table with a neat stack of papers between us. She slid a pen across to me and said we should at least schedule the appointment. The page on top had a blank where another name would go. It did not have mine. She said it was just a draft. She said the attorney would fill things in later. I noticed a smudge of ink at the corner of her thumb. I noticed that she did not look at me when she talked. We saved that first house after the big hailstorm by patching shingles one by one. You could see the scars from the street if you knew where to look. Most people do not know where to look. Inside, the small fixes accumulate. Inside, the seams dry out and no one checks the corner where 2 walls meet. You tell yourself a crack is only paint settling. You tell yourself that a door that sticks is just humidity. You tell yourself that if you ignore it, the season will turn and the problem will resolve on its own. I spent this afternoon at my workbench because the bench allows a man to sort things by hand. Wood either fits or it does not. A blade is either sharp or it is not. The blueprint lay beside my tools, and I traced the line of the bedroom again, darker than before. I let my finger pass over the living room. The faintness there hurt more than I expected. It is a special kind of ache to realize a laugh has weight only in memory. I tried to remember the last time Clara stood beside me to look at a drawing. It has been months. She stands at the kitchen island now and scrolls through her phone. She says she is booking a flight for a friend who needs help. She says she is catching up with women from church. She says a lot of things that sound reasonable. Reasonable words can hide a pit deep enough to take a whole house down. When Lydia called last week about the school fundraiser, Clara took the call in the bedroom with the door mostly closed. I heard her tell our daughter not to worry about guest lists. She said she had it under control. I want to be fair. It is not a crime to host a party. It is not a crime to guard a secret. It is a crime to take a man's trust and use it as a tool against him. I did not know then that a party list would become a practice run for something colder. Clara, when she was 24, would sit on the steps with me at midnight after we had installed cabinet doors. She would lean into my shoulder and say she liked the smell of sawdust. She would tell me no one ever tells you how good ordinary feels until you lose it. She would press her hand to my chest and wait for my heartbeat to slow. I keep that version of her somewhere. I keep her in the same drawer as my honorable discharge papers and the photograph of Lydia asleep in a car seat with a toy hammer in her fist. It is possible to love what is gone and still defend what remains. I can hear her words from the early days as if someone wrote them in the margins of that old drawing. You build things that last. So will we. If I speak them now, they taste like rainwater left too long in a metal cup. I do not spit them out. I just set them down. The house is quiet this evening. The refrigerator hums. The clock ticks. In another room, the washing machine turns. I do not think about the blinds I watched earlier. I do not think about the laughter that did not belong in my home. I keep my hands on work I know how to do. I sharpen a chisel. I fold the blueprint carefully and slide it back into its tube. I wipe the pencil dust from my fingers with a clean rag. There is a comfort in tasks that end. On my way out, I set the tube on the table and the lamplight hits the glass face of the compass. The surface throws a thin gold bar across the drawing like a path I forgot to mark. The needle looks steadier than it did this afternoon. Maybe it is only the table being level. Maybe it is something else. My father used to say a compass will tell you the truth if you meet it halfway. A man can refuse to listen. The needle will not argue. It simply waits. I leave the room and turn out the light. In the doorway, I stop and look back once. No car, no blinds, no witnesses. Just a blueprint that once held our whole life and a small circle of glass catching the last light of the lamp. No building falls in a day. It falls a hair at a time while good people look at other things. I am done looking away. Tomorrow I will take the folder from the desk and open it. I will read every line. I will circle every blank where a name should be. I will make a mark where a mark belongs. Then I will set the plan aside and keep the parts of my life that still stand. I put the tube down and the lamplight spills over the compass again. The reflection looks like a thin road on the paper. It points in a direction I already know. In the military, precision saves lives. In marriage, it can save your sanity. That is what I told myself the next morning when I carried 2 folders into Harriet Lang's office and set them down like I was laying out a flight plan. The room smelled like paper and toner and a little like something citrus from a cleaner she probably used every Friday. Harriet kept everything neat. Even her pen cup was arranged by ink color, the blues together, the blacks together, one pencil sharpened to a needle point. She glanced at the folders, then at me. She has been doing my books for 15 years. She knows what my face looks like when a project runs over budget. This was not that face. I asked if she had time. She nodded and slid a legal pad in front of her. Her handwriting is small and precise, a habit she says she picked up when forms still had limited character boxes. I opened the first folder and spread out 3 months of statements for my personal checking, the savings accounts, the company operating account, and the credit cards. I placed a yellow pad next to her pad. I wrote 2 words at the top like a heading. Find pattern. Harriet looked up. You sure you want to know everything I told her that not knowing nearly killed me once? Let's not repeat that. We began with the simplest thing, dates and amounts. I read them out. She wrote them down like a court reporter, no drama, no rush. She made columns, vendor, frequency, change from baseline. The numbers lined up in tidy rows, which made the irregular ones stand out like bent nails in a straight board. A series of transfers caught her eye. They were not large enough to trigger a call from the bank, but not small enough to ignore. Each was within a few dollars of the last. Each was labeled with a name that tried to sound friendly. Meadow Group Services. I told Harriet I did not know that name. She tapped a few keys and scanned. The merchant address belonged to a mailbox store on Cerrillos. I tried to remember if Clara had mentioned a subscription or a club or a fundraiser that might run through a third party. Nothing came to mind. Harriet circled the line items with the tip of her pen. She asked if I would authorize a merchant inquiry with the bank so we could see the contract behind the billing descriptor. I signed her authorization form and tried not to think about the last time I signed something without reading every line. We sorted through card charges that looked like ordinary life. Groceries, gas, a garden center, the place that sharpens my saw blades. Harriet knows the shape of my months, which is a strange thing to say about a person who is not family and not a friend in the usual sense. She paused over a charge from a firm downtown, a small retainer. It could have been for real estate work. It could have been for anything. The amount was round and neat, as if chosen more for ease than accuracy. She asked if I had hired anyone legal personnel in the last 60 days. I had not. She peeled a note from a stack of sticky flags and marked the line. We moved on. The company account looked clean, just payroll and materials and vendor credits. The savings accounts looked normal too, except for a scheduled transfer that had not been there last quarter. Money moved every other Tuesday to a separate bank where we kept an old emergency fund. The recipient account number ended in 4 digits I did not recognize. Harriet pulled a drawer and took out a ledger book, the old kind with green lines and a spine that creaks. It is mostly ceremonial in the age of software, but she uses it when she wants to see the whole field at once. She laid it open and began a hand map. Income on the left is like supply lines. Expenses on the right like front lines. The scheduled transfer ran through the center like a slender road cutting a field in two. She added dates in the margins. She added arrows for direction. She drew a small question mark next to the emergency bank entry and wrote a note. Verify ownership. Her desk phone buzzed. She ignored it. She leaned closer to the screen and pulled up a report for beneficiary designations on accounts tied to our household. She compared the list to the copy in my folder. Then she compared both lists to a scan from last year. That is when it quite shifted. A name had been added to the contact profile on a savings account I opened when Lydia was in college. Not added as an owner, added as a secondary contact with the authority to receive information. The name was spelled with the careful exactness of a person who does not make typos. The surname matched Dylan's firm. The first name belonged to his law partner. I felt my jaw move as if to say something, and then I did not say it. Harriet did not look at me. She just wrote a straight line through the page and said we would need to run a full access audit. She asked if Clara had ever discussed adding a third party for convenience. I shook my head. She asked if I would sign another authorization, the one that releases the bank from any claim of breach when they show me access history. I signed. The pen felt heavy. We kept working because the work steadied me. She printed out a list of auto payments and held it up to the window to check the watermark, a habit from years of catching cheap forgery. Sometime in the last 2 months, a new auto draft began to hit my personal account. It was set to pull on the same day my company's invoice from a supplier arrived. If I had not come in this morning, I would have missed it next to the ordinary weight of a materials payment. The draft name was Arcadia Trustee Services. I do not have a trustee, not one that uses my personal bank card. Harriet typed quietly, lips pressed together in the way a person's mouth looks when they are trying not to swear in front of a client. She cross-referenced the draft ID with a public corporate registry. Her finger landed on a line halfway down the page. Arcadia Trustee Services handled short-term escrow arrangements for small firms. It also handled personal trust seating for family law attorneys. The registered agent was the same law partner who had appeared on my savings account contact profile. We did not say anything for a long moment. Then Harriet asked if we should call it a day. I told her we should do the opposite. I asked if she would walk me through every place a change could be made without my knowledge. She took out another sheet and wrote headings: bank, credit cards, retirement, insurance, deeds. She underlined insurance twice. People forget that policies can be adjusted quietly. Beneficiaries can be moved with a single online session. She sent a secure message to the carrier and requested a change log. She printed a copy of my most recent homeowner's coverage and slid it across. I had never noticed the line for scheduled personal property riders. I had never thought to check what had been added there in the spring. She pointed to a piece of jewelry. I do not wear jewelry. She does. The sum covered items I had never seen. Harriet moved to retirement accounts last. She prefers to leave the hardest thing for later so the mind can climb toward it instead of falling into it. The login accepted her access as fiduciary. She clicked through menus with the quick care of someone who knows where companies hide the fine print. A form had been generated and saved as a draft. It was titled An Update of the Successor and Co-Signing Authority. The file creation date matched a Tuesday when I was at a site inspection 2 towns over. The file had not been completed. It had not needed to be yet. My name was there in the line where it always sat. Another line waited. It had once been blank. Now a cursor blinked over it like a heartbeat that had not decided whether to continue. I asked Harriet what we were really looking at. She folded her hands and said something measured. We are looking at preparation, not action, not yet. Just a series of small doors being unlocked so a larger door can open quickly when someone pushes. She took the ledger book and underlined a date at the top of the page. She said we had time if we respected it. She said we needed to verify every path into my accounts and close the ones that did not belong. She said we should have the bank note that any further change requires in-person verification from me with secondary ID. She said all of this like a pilot calls altitude and heading. I told her I could handle calls if she gave me the list. She said she would rather make them herself while I sat and listened because some banks talk faster when another professional is on the line. She asked again if I was sure I wanted to hear everything. I said I did. Then I added the thing I had been avoiding. I told her there might be a person at the other end of these lines who shares my table. She nodded once like a salute to hard facts and began to dial. We spent the next hour confirming points of entry. The banks flagged an IP address unfamiliar to me that had checked balances but made no changes. They confirmed a separate card had been requested for a travel convenience program tied to our joint account. The pickup location had been a branch across town near the courthouse. No one called me about that request. The travel card had been activated by phone with answers to security questions, questions that live in the same house as I do. Harriet's face did not change as she wrote. She is very good at her job. She thanked every bank representative by name. She asked them to read back the notes they added to my file. She asked them to send confirmations to her secure fax. People still fax for a reason, she says. It forces a pause that email does not. When we were done, she turned the ledger book toward me. The green lines ran like roads and rivers. She had drawn arrows to show where money wanted to flow. She had marked in red the places where new channels had been cut. She tapped the page at 2 points. Arcadia Trustee Services, Meadow Group Services. The first was a gate. The second was a disguise. She added one more line under the merchant name. Registered address ties back to a law office suite on the 4th floor of a building where Dylan sometimes works. She did not say his name. She did not need to. I did not feel rage. I felt something quieter. The way a person feels when fog lifts and reveals a cliff that has been standing there the whole time. Harriet closed the ledger and slid it across the desk. She said the book is a map of a battlefield. She said maps help if the person reading them accepts what they show. I stood and thanked her. She said she would keep digging and send me a secure summary by evening. She touched my forearm when I reached for the folders, a small gesture. The kind people who do their job well sometimes make mistakes when they wish they did not have to. I walked to the window before I left. Traffic moved along in that steady city rhythm that pretends nothing goes wrong under daylight. On Harriet's credenza sat a paperweight in the shape of a small brass compass. It was a gift from a client years ago, she said once. I looked at mine later, the one on my desk at home. It rested on the table where the old blueprint had been the night before. The needle looked calmer now, maybe because I had given it a map to sit beside, maybe because the truth had finally taken shape on paper. Sue, that kumbaujo fa hui, it only strips the paint off the illusion. I repeated that under my breath as I closed Harriet's office door and stepped into the corridor. I did not look back. I did not need to. The ledger had already drawn the lines I needed to follow, and the compass on my table when I reached home and set my keys down eased its tiny shiver and pointed where it always meant to point. He showed up at my office with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Morning light made the glass door look like water. He stood there for a second as if waiting for permission to be the person he was pretending to be. I said, "Come in." He said he was just in the neighborhood. No one is ever just in the neighborhood of a contractor's shop at 8:30 unless they want something. I kept the place tidy that day. Plans stacked edge to edge, tools put away. The old blueprint tube is at the back. My desk had two things on it: a mug of coffee that was still too hot to drink and the small brass compass on the shelf above my shoulder. Dylan's gaze flicked once toward the shelf and back. He did not linger. He is a man who trains his eyes. He commented on the weather and the traffic near the plaza. I asked how Lydia was. He said, "Fine." His voice clipped the word and set it down like a coin that might roll off the table if you breathed too hard. Then he said the real thing. He hoped I was not overwhelmed with paperwork these days. He knows I do not get overwhelmed by paper. He knows I move paper to move money and that I do not take it personally. I let that hang. He glanced at the coffee. He said he could use a cup. I said I had only one and did not move to fix another. He took the chair across from me. The smile returned thin and practiced. He asked about the shop. He asked about crews. He asked about supply chains and whether lumber prices had settled. I answered like a man half listening. It makes people talk. They fill the space you leave them. He leaned in just enough to feel confident and said everyone downtown was buzzing about a facilities retrofit that would go out for bid next quarter. He said a number. It matched the private estimate from last week's city call. I had not discussed that number with anyone outside my office in Harriet. I did not blink. Have you ever wondered what happens when blueprints change mid-project? I let the words fall gently, almost curious. He was ready. Then the builder adjusts. He gave the headline answer a man gives when he wants to sound practical, only if he sees it coming. I said that looking straight at him. He looked down at his hands. He did not like the angle of the conversation anymore. He asked about my health next. Not in a kind way, in a way that sounded like an intake questionnaire. He said people our age find it helpful to simplify. He said the courts like clarity. He said it the way you might caution a neighbor about ice on the walk. Safe words. The middle of his sentences had a hum to them like a wire carrying current. I took a slow sip of coffee. It had cooled a little. The surface wavered when I set it back down. In the body of men like me, there is an old switch that flips when someone shows you their hand disguised as concern. I felt it flip and then reset. I imagined a map the way Harriet draws a map. Lines for accounts. Arrows for movement. A red mark wherever a stranger tries a door. He asked if I had time to look over something. He opened his brief bag and produced a single envelope with nothing written on the front. He slid it toward me the distance of a palm. He did not let go. He said it was a prudent general template for household transitions. He said everyone should have one on the shelf ready to go in case of emergencies. The word emergencies did not sound like storms or sickness the way he used it. It sounded like an opportunity. I did not touch the envelope. I said we have a family template already. He nodded as if he had expected that and said, "Sometimes it is good to have a second opinion from a firm that handles both business and personal matters in one storefront." He named a firm I did not recognize. Then he named Arcadia. He said their trustee service was ideal for quick transfers when timing matters. He used a tone that made me think of a waiter recommending a special he knows is past its best. I asked how he knew the retrofit number. He gave a smile that tried to reappear and failed again. He said a little bird. I told him we do not keep birds here. He said it is a small town. I said our town has gotten bigger. He said still smaller than Phoenix. I let him have that. The coffee had cooled enough to drink. I took another sip. The mug left a ring on the paperwork beneath it. I did not move the mug. He watched the ring spread and fade. That is how a person watches when he does not know whether to be nervous. He started to talk about the shape of trusts as if he were narrating a brochure. He said the word seamless twice. He said once the right documents are signed, the rest is largely mechanical. He folded his hands and added that a man with my schedule would appreciate a process that respects his time. I asked about Lydia's thesis back when she was still in school. I asked if he remembered the night we read chapters at the kitchen table. His face stayed polite. He did not expect that turn. He said, "Of course." He said those were good nights. I let the quiet sit between us. Then I asked if he thought she would recognize the way someone changes when they plan something they do not want on paper. He said I did not follow. I said she has always been good at patterns. He nodded. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He shifted to money again. He brought up liquidity and tax timing the way a person brings up weather when there is a storm on the radar. He mentioned a number I had not told anyone, a number tied to a progress payment due if the retrofit contract is awarded on schedule. He spoke it as if it were a word he used every day. That was when I knew where he had learned it. I let my eyes go to the compass above my shoulder. I did not have to turn my head. I know where it sits, the way a pilot knows where the altimeter sits. The needle was steady. Mine was too. Dylan followed my gaze a little. He said that was a nice piece. I told him it was an old family. He said he likes old things. He said they carry stories. He looked like a man trying to remember a story he had not bothered to learn. I asked why he really came. He said he wanted to be helpful. He said Lydia worries when she senses tension. He said if there is anything he can do to make our household simpler, he is here. I said I appreciate the offer. I said decisions that belong to me will remain with me. He nodded and said, "Of course." He asked if he could leave the envelope. I told him he could, and I placed it next to the coffee where heat had made its mark. He took a breath as if he was going to ask one more question and instead asked a different one. He wanted to know if I had ever considered retiring completely. He said a man should enjoy the years he earned. He used a voice that tried to fit the shape of care and did not quite make it. I said I still like my work. He said sometimes people like control more than work. The room felt smaller for a moment. I stood and walked to the cabinet where we keep measurements for stair runs and handrail heights. I took out a binder and flipped it open as if I needed to confirm a number I learned in 1979. I let him watch me ignore his premise. He filled the silence with a monologue about a friend who waited too long to step back and made a mess for his family. He did not say the friend's name. He said burden twice. He said leftover accounts and probate. He smiled at the envelope as if it were a first aid kit. I pictured a ledger with a red line through his story. I closed the binder. I told him that small changes mid-project can take a wall down if you cut the wrong stud. He said that is why the right oversight matters. He said that is where someone like him comes in. He said a sentence about trusted guidance that sounded like it had been tested on clients many times. I watched his eyes as he said it. They never warmed. The coffee was now cool all the way through. I picked up the mug and placed it on a coaster. A small act. He tracked it like a hawk tracks a mouse in a field. Some men reveal themselves with appetite, some with fear. He reveals himself with a need to tally every move. He asked whether I had plans for the afternoon. I said yes. He asked if I would share them. I smiled. He did not like the feeling of not holding the list. He said we should have lunch soon. I said we should. He said he would text. I nodded. He stood and adjusted his jacket and put the smile back on. At the door he turned and tried one last pass. He said he hoped there were no surprises in the days ahead. I said surprises make a man sharpen his tools. He said he prefers predictability. I said me too. He put his hand on the door and paused as if waiting for me to bless the rest of his afternoon. I did not. The latch clicked when the door closed. Sound carries differently in an empty office. Footsteps fade fast on concrete. I waited until the sound was gone. The room felt level again. I picked up the envelope and did not open it. I placed it in a drawer and slid the drawer shut. Then I set my palm on the desk and felt the cool ring where the mug had been. A circle you can only see if you are looking for it. Harriet would have circled it in blue ink. She would have written a word next to it. Source. I walked to the shelf and looked at the compass. The needle held steady. The glass face caught a shard of daylight and threw a thin line of brightness across the wall. I breathed once and let it out slowly. Not the first punch. The look. The quiet. That is what unsettles a liar. The knowledge that you saw him without reaching for the lights. The sense that the room has changed and he cannot name how. I sat back down and made a note where he had flinched. The retrofit figure. The travel card. The trustee's name was spoken like a greeting. I wrote them in a small hand the way Harriet writes. I wrote them in ink. Then I closed the notebook and let the silence settle where it belonged. The camera of memory holds on to little things when bigger ones try to intrude. On my desk, a coffee cup is cooling. On the shelf, a compass that does not argue. On the other side of my door, a man was walking faster than he arrived. I stopped asking why. I started drafting how. The sentence came to me before sunrise when the house was still and everything that hurt belonged to yesterday. I brewed coffee and cleared the workbench, pushing aside small repairs that could wait. I laid out a clean pad, a pen that did not blot, and the ledger copies Harriet had given me. When I wrote the first word on the page, my hand was steadier than I expected. Information first, action second. That is the order they taught us when decisions carried weight. I went line by line through Harriet's notes until the names formed a path I could walk with my eyes closed. Meadow Group Services, Arcadia Trustee Services, a retainer downtown. A contact was added where it did not belong. None of it shouted. It hummed. It asked me to follow. I called Harriet as soon as her office light came on. She answered on the second ring and said she had been expecting me. She had already pulled the access logs that came in overnight. She read me the highlights as if reciting coordinates, confirmed third-party inquiries on 2 accounts, a scheduled transfer was modified last month. A beneficiary rider was created as a draft on a retirement platform. No movement yet on the deeded properties. Good news disguised as a delay. I told her I wanted to put friction between anyone and anything tied to my name. She said she would prepare the requests for in-person verification. She asked if I had a moment to stop by. We should sign while the morning is quiet. I said I would be there in 20. Harriet had a stack of forms on her desk arranged like a precise staircase. She slid them across one at a time, explaining without drama. Notice to the bank that all changes require my physical presence and secondary identification. Notice to the retirement custodian to freeze any pending drafts until I review them in the office. A request for alert emails to me and to Harriet's secure inbox for any attempt to reset passwords. And one more less obvious is asking the bank for a list of safe deposit boxes linked to our household. It is the kind of list a person assumes they know until they do not. We signed in neat strokes. I wrote slowly, refusing to let my hand hurry. Harriet watched the signature lines like a guard at a door. When she put the last form aside, she took a breath and said a sentence I had not expected to hear from her. "You are setting a trap." I looked at the paper between us. "No, I am building a mirror." Her mouth softened with understanding. She tapped the corner of the form with her pen. "Then let us make sure the glass is clean." While her assistant prepared the faxes and confirmations, Harriet called a colleague. She trusts an attorney who retired from court but still knew how courthouses think. Cynthia agreed to see me midday. Harriet said Cynthia keeps a small office behind a stationery shop, the kind of place people assume sells wedding invitations and nothing more. People are often wrong. I spent the hour before that appointment doing what a man my age does when a storm is coming. I paid a bill that would not wait. I returned a call about a shipment of cedar. I told my crew lead I would be on site later in the week. The words I used were simple. The subtext was clear. Keep the wheels turning. Do not announce a change. Then I walked into the stationery shop and let myself be guided through aisles of thick paper and fountain pens to a back door with a brass knob. Cynthia looked like a person who once lived at a courthouse and still kept the hours. Her hair was silver and pulled tight. Her desk held 3 stacks. No more, no less. She waved me to a chair and asked nothing for a full 10 seconds. That silence did more work than most questions. I told her I needed to formalize a design that kept what was mine from being disturbed without crossing any line that would embarrass a judge later. She nodded once. She asked for the names I was protecting and the names I was protecting them from. I gave her both lists. She asked about timing. I said sooner than I would like and later than they would prefer. She smiled almost. She said she missed sentences like that. We started with structure. She recommended updating my will to reflect present realities without broadcasting a battle. She suggested a revocable trust for business continuity, not to hide, but to simplify routing and take away the lever a bad actor prefers. She reminded me to separate titles from access, a distinction people ignore until it breaks. She wrote in a calm hand on yellow paper. Title here, access here, proof of intent everywhere. She asked if I had a trusted person besides Harriet to serve as secondary in case of crisis. I said our daughter. She asked if our daughter understood the cost of standing in a doorway between parents. I said she understands more than her mother thinks. Cynthia said, "Then we will give her a role with boundaries and instructions that will keep her protected if voices rise later." We went through properties. We went through accounts. We went through insurance riders. and the kind of paperwork most men let sit in a drawer because it was fine last year. Cynthia's questions had clean edges. She did not wander. When we came to the place where the draft on my retirement sat waiting for someone to type a second name, she circled it and wrote a single instruction. Freeze. Document. Notify. While she made copies, I scrolled my phone, not for messages, but for patterns. A vendor name I did not recognize on a charge Harriet had flagged returned in a different shape in my text history. A confirmation code from a number ending in 4 digits. I did not know pinged a day I was out of town. I dialed the number. A polite recorded voice announced family legal trust in the tone companies use to sound permanent. I hung up without speaking. Cynthia came back and asked if something had moved. I told her the name and the voice. She pulled her laptop close and typed into a database I could not see. She said Family Legal Trust was not a standalone entity. It was a label used by a small cluster of firms to make client statements easy to read. She said the registrations on that label track to a holding account at a bank that also processes payments for Arcadia trustee services. She paused. She looked up. The office was quiet enough to hear the minute hand moving on a wall clock. She asked how that felt to hear, like a new road on a map I did not draw. She printed the page with the cluster names and placed it under my hand. Then she drew a thin line between 2 of the names and wrote a surname in the margin. The law partner in Dylan's office. Different firm, same building, same floor. She tapped that spot with a fingernail. That is a bridge. For a moment the air in the room changed shape. Not smaller, sharper. Sometimes knowledge tightens focus more than a threat can. I did not think about what he could take. I thought about what still stood. Cynthia had me sign the initial documents to start the new routing. Durable authorization is limited to Harriet and to Lydia with strict language. Notice letters to the banks instruct them to disregard any future contact requests that do not originate from me in person. She explained how the wording matters. People win battles because a sentence was clear enough to leave no invitation. When I signed the last page, the pencil I used for notes rolled under my palm and snapped in 2. The sound was small and absolute. Cynthia looked at the halves and then at me. Some breaks make a clean edge, she said. Easier to fit a new piece when you can see where the old ended. I gathered the 2 halves and placed them side by side on the desk like a memory you respect and no longer need. We confirmed the next steps. Her office would push the filings by the end of the day. She asked me for one favor in return. Keep your voice level when you go home. I told her my voice learned that skill long ago. On the way out through the stationery shop, I stopped at a display and bought a fresh drafting pencil. The woman at the counter wrapped it in tissue with a care that felt ceremonial. I slid it into my shirt pocket and walked back into a sun I did not notice had moved higher. At home I did not sit. Movement keeps nerves from inventing stories. I scanned receipts into a folder. I photographed the envelope Dylan left and saved the metadata. I placed Harriet's ledger copies in a fire safe and left a duplicate set with a neighbor who does not ask questions. Then I opened my email. Harriet had sent a secure note confirming that the banks had posted the in-person requirement. One line at the end stood apart from the rest. The travel card is now flagged. Any swipe will trigger an alert. I wrote back a single word. Good. I spent the late afternoon at my shop not to work on wood but to clear surfaces. I took apart a cabinet door and put it back together by feel. The hands know before the mind admits. While I worked, my phone vibrated with a number I did not know. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text came through saying there had been difficulty processing a routine transfer to Family Legal Trust and would I like assistance. I saved the message. I did not reply. As evening settled, I laid the day's papers on the bench the way a man sets out tools before a job begins. Faxes from Harriet, confirmations from banks. Cynthia's yellow sheet with the word freeze written clean. At the bottom of my own page, I printed 4 words in block letters. Phase 1 complete. I did not underline them. I did not need to. I turned off the shop light and for a second the room fell into a soft dark that felt like water. In that dark, the brass face of the compass caught the last slice of daylight coming through the high window and returned it in a thin band across the first page of the new design. A line of brightness you could follow if you chose. I stood and let that be enough. Victory does not come from breaking the other person. It comes when he has to face what he built in a mirror he cannot tilt away. I am not hunting. I am not swinging. I am laying out edges and angles and waiting for the moment when the straight line meets the line. Then I will let the glass do the rest. When you cut access to money, you cut the mask off too. I felt that truth land before breakfast right as my phone buzzed with an alert Harriet had set. Attempted charge declined. Location downtown. Merchant name softened with polite syllables. Family something. I didn't smile. I just watched the notification fade and listened to the house breathe. The ringtone followed a beat later, sharp and insistent, the kind of sound that makes the body tense before the mind chooses a response. I answered on the third ring. Clara's voice came hot and brittle at once. My card isn't working. I tried twice. It's ridiculous. I told her it might be a bank security sweep. That happens when systems flag unusual activity. She said nothing about the unusual. She said she was standing at a counter with people behind her and a clerk looking at her like she'd stolen something. A pause, like a held breath, then softer. Did you change the accounts? I took a slow step toward the window and kept my voice level. I changed priorities. Silence. Not long. Just enough to fit an understanding inside it. She pushed the next sentence through her teeth. I need access. Today. I told her we could stop by the bank together if it would make her feel better. She said she didn't need me to hold her hand. I said that the bank will ask for in-person identification. It's policy. She said this is humiliating. Fix it. I checked my watch and told her I had a site walkthrough in 20 minutes. Then I added a line I knew would land. I'll call after I talk to Harriet. The call ended with a click that tried to sound like control. Another alert blinked immediately. Travel card swipe declined. Branch near the courthouse. The ringtone returned the same sharp rhythm like a heart turning itself around. I let it run a beat longer, then answered. This time, a bank representative read from a script, polite and steady, confirming that an attempt had been made to reset recovery questions on our joint account. I confirmed my new instructions on file. In person only. Secondary ID required. He thanked me for my diligence. I thanked him for his time. The brass face of this compass on my shelf caught a line of light and sent it sideways across the desk. Texts stacked in while I gathered a notebook and the keys. This is absurd. They said I need you to be there. What did you tell them? I kept my replies sparse. Looking into it. Call you later. Keeping statements short makes people supply their own stories. People in a hurry write the truth by accident. On the way to the shop, another call came in a different number, a familiar tone hiding under friendliness. Dylan. He opened with neighborly concern. He heard there were hiccups with card access. He hoped I wasn't stuck mid-purchase. I let a chuckle out that didn't carry warmth. No hiccup on my end. He said it was probably a glitch. He said these systems overreact. He said he knew people who could smooth things out. I said disruptions clarify things. He wrapped a sentence around Lydia's name like a ribbon. She worries when there's tension. I told him our daughter was perceptive. He tried again. We should sit down, align documents, and make sure we're not working at cross purposes. I told him I was busy aligning something else and ended the call before he could find another angle. At the shop, the crew lead ran through measurements and small delays and everything that keeps a day simple. His voice steadied me like a level across a long span. While he talked, my phone vibrated twice more in my pocket, then stopped, then started again. That ring became a metronome that did not care who listened. I finished the walkthrough, adjusted 2 cuts, scheduled a delivery, and left them to work. My feet felt like they knew the route home without me asking. Halfway there, the phone lit up with Clara's name again. I answered before the first ring ended. She said she went to the bank. They told her changes had been made to access protocols. She wanted to know who authorized that. I told her I did. She tried a different tone than the pleasant one. Isn't this a bit much? We're a family. I told her a family was precisely why a man keeps his accounts honest and his keys close. She said this is making me feel controlled. I said you asked last month for more cosigner convenience in case I was away. I'm here. She started to protest, then switched lanes. There are bills, Raymond. People depend on me to handle things, I said. Which bills, which people? She did not answer. The ringtone of the world found its way back in the gap between us. She filled it with a small sound that could have been frustration or fear. Both wear the same shoes when money walks away. By lunch, the ripple had widened. Harriet sent a secure update. Attempted transfer to family legal trust halted. Notice sent to the account contact of failure. I imagined the notice arriving at the same counter where Clara had stood with her card. I pictured her reading a sentence that did not have my name on it and hearing only mine anyway. She called again from a parking lot if the wind in the speaker was any clue. Her words came fast. "This is unnecessary. I am standing in the sun like a fool. People are staring. Just fix it." My mouth formed a sentence that belonged to an older version of me. The version swallowed offense as if it were a medicine that might add a day to the calendar. I let that sentence go. Instead, I asked if she wanted me to pick her up so we could head to the bank together. She said she would handle it. She always handles it. I said then there is nothing to fix. The pause stretched. She said, "Watch yourself." I said I do. The afternoon settled into tasks that require a body to move but not think. I organized drill bits by size. I swept a floor that was already clean. The phone rang and rang and rang. Different numbers. The same request dressed in fresh clothes. The machine in the house caught the ones I did not answer. The tiny red light blinking matched the pulse in my wrist at first, then slowed. The calls told a story without me adding a word. Bank, boutique, bank, again. Someone said the word authorization in a voice that tried to be gentle and failed. Someone asked for a callback to confirm whether a joint card holder should be permitted to ask questions. I did not call back. Harriet already had. An hour later, the screen lit with Lydia's name. That ring feels different in the body. I answered right away. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was. She said Mom called her upset. She said Mom used the word controlling and then switched to worried and then pretended to ask for a recipe she never cooks. Lydia's training makes her allergic to vagueness. She asked me what had changed. I said I was making sure banks did what banks are supposed to do. She asked me if there was anything she should know. I told her not yet. I told her to take care of herself and the small things in front of her. There was a silence made of agreement. She said she loved me. I said I loved her back and felt something in my chest unclench just enough to breathe deeper. Near 4:15, the front door opened. Clara came in with sunglasses still on and set her bag on the island the way a person sets down a verdict. She didn't bother with hello. We stood across from each other with a pane of air and 27 years of routine between us. Her voice landed low. "You embarrassed me today." I said, "That sounds like a bank problem." She said, "Stop it." She said, "This is childish." She said, "You don't lock your wife out of her own life." I told her I had not locked anyone out of anything that belonged to them. I told her I had changed how we confirm who is holding the keys. She wanted a list of every change. I told her we could review them together at the branch. She said I was punishing her. I said I was protecting us. She reached into her bag and took out a stack of envelopes and scattered them across the island as if proof had weight. She pointed at a bill with a due date and said, "Look." I looked. I told her I would pay that online by dinner time. She asked for the password to our joint account. I said I would log in from my phone. She stared like she could will a different answer into existence. She tried a new path. She softened her voice. "I just need to know you're not spiraling. You've been distant. You skipped lunch with the guys last week. You left early from the fundraiser." I said I was aligning projects. She said you used to talk to me. I said I am speaking now. She picked up the envelopes with jerky movements that made the corners bend. Her hand shook when she tried to smooth one back to straight. She looked at me like she did the first month after Lydia was born, when neither of us had slept and the washing machine flooded the laundry room, and I stood ankle deep in cold water and laughed because there was nothing else to do. Except now, there was something else to do, and I had begun doing it. Her phone rang then, loud, urgent, that same staccato rhythm that had chased me all day. She answered and turned away to the window, not toward it, a habit of people with things to hide. I heard a man's voice through the thin echo of the speaker. Not words, just heat. She said, "I'm trying." She said he changed everything. She said later. She ended the call with a thumb that trembled once and then went still. She tried one more time. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." I said the sentence I knew would end the conversation. "It needs to be this hard." She left the room without another word. The house exhaled. The answering machine, an old relic we keep for spam, and the few friends who still think of phones as phones clicked and began to play a new message. A woman from the bank is explaining the verification requirement. A man from Arcadia is using a customer service voice to request a callback for routine confirmation. Then Clara's own voice from 20 minutes earlier already echoing, asking me to stop whatever I was doing and fix it. The machine beeped and waited for the next message. A dot of red light kept time on the counter. The sound of the ring again from the phone this time, as if determined to stitch the day into one long thread. I stood in the doorway of my office and looked at the compass. The needle held firm now, not because the world calmed, but because something inside me had. You do not need to shout to be heard by the truth. You only need to stop answering the wrong calls. I reached for the phone and watched the screen for a second. Clara's name filled it again. Behind her name lay years and vows and small mornings that felt unremarkable until they were gone. The ring cut through the air. The needle did not twitch. I pressed the side button and the sound vanished. The screen went dark. The machine in the kitchen started to record another message. I let it. Silence is not an absence. It is a tool. It teaches a person where their voice ends and another person's choices begin. I turned off the lamp. The compass caught a thin seam of light and returned it to the papers where Phase 1 now lived as more than ink. The house listened. I did too. And for the first time in a long time, I liked what I did not hear. Every building has weak soil. I found theirs. It sat under the nice stories they told about security and care hidden beneath polished words. You only notice it when you lean a little and the ground gives back a tremor. I called Max Ortega the morning after the phones would not stop, gave him a clean scope and a short list, and told him what I tell crews before a delicate cut. Stay inside the line. We do this right or we do not do it. Max works out of a narrow office above a locksmith. The hallway smells like metal shavings and coffee that has lived too long on a hot plate. He met me with a handshake and a look that measured speed and pain in the same glance. I laid Harriet's summaries on his table and spoke the names that had begun to form a low hum in my head. Arcadia, Meadow. A polite corporate voice that calls itself Family Legal Trust. A son-in-law with smooth sentences and a calendar full of courthouse lunches. He asked questions that had nothing to do with gossip and everything to do with access. What did I control? What could I document? What did I need to prove for a judge to listen without raising a hand for quiet? I told him I needed a timeline that stood in daylight. I told him to ignore emotion, follow movement, and write down who touched what and when. He nodded and took a small notebook from his pocket. He writes in a boxy hand that wastes ink on nothing. He said he would start with public records and people who will talk for the price of a burger because they like being part of a story. He said no one hacks anything because that breaks more than it fixes. He said there are legal ways to find out where money sleeps. By noon, he had a thread. He had a court filing from a gaming authority downstate listed an unpaid marker under an initial and a surname that matched Dylan's. The amount was not ruinous. It was repetitive. There were 3 filings over the last year, each cleared within weeks by cashier's checks drawn from an intermediary firm that ties back to a building I could direct a driver to with my eyes closed. Max brought me a copy and set it on the table between us like a carpenter lays a square. You see the angle when you see the line. We followed it. The second stop was a money services company that sells cashier's checks. A cashier who remembered a man who dressed nicely and used a voice that sounded like television news. No private details, no breach of anything sacred. Just a comment about the way people tap the counter when they are waiting for a stamp. Tap, tap. Impatience has a rhythm. Max drove us out to a resort with a name that tries to sound like water in a place that is mostly stone. He parked a respectful distance from the entrance and walked me through the parts of the property where the public is allowed to stand and the things the public is allowed to read. There was a board that listed prohibited activities and the consequences of forgetting what you owe. There was a desk where a woman explained in the same tone bank tellers use when you overdraw by accident what a marker is and what happens when it is not met on time. We thanked her. We bought coffee. We did nothing that would shame a person for doing a job. He pushed open a door with a paper flyer taped to the glass. It advertised a charity night hosted by a downtown law firm. There was a logo at the bottom I had seen on letterhead, and a small note about proceeds benefiting a group that keeps its name on the good side of people's minds. Max tapped the corner of the paper. People rarely keep separate lives as separate as they believe. On the drive back, he made calls. A bartender near the courthouse remembered a man who stayed later than he stayed well and paid tabs with cards that did not always share a name with the tab. A valet remembered a Range Rover in blue that arrived mid-afternoon, left in a hurry, and returned near closing. Nothing illegal. A pattern. Patterns are what you build timelines from. At his office, he set 3 folders on the table. He opened the first and withdrew a copy of a cashier's check made out to an entity that dissolved last fall. The back carried a deposit stamp for an account with a name I had underlined in Harriet's ledger. He opened the second and found a charity receipt that looked the way receipts look when they are meant to sit politely in a tax folder. The date matched one of the filings the gaming board had removed after payment. He opened the third and read me a transcript he had purchased from a small claims hearing. A creditor complained about a debt stemming from poker. The judge dismissed on a technicality. The attorney of record for the defense shared an office with a person who once signed a trust document for Arcadia. I could feel the soil under my feet shift half an inch and then settle. He looked up at me. "You want me to leak this?" He said it like a man offering a match to someone staring at kindling. "No, I just need it ready when truth is required." His shoulders eased in that way people's bodies ease when the worst version of the plan is not the plan. He slid an envelope toward me. Inside were photographs you could take standing on a sidewalk. No one's rights bent. No one's life was invaded. A man at a window where markers are cleared. A man at a desk where checks are stamped. A man was laughing with someone I did not recognize in a lobby that wanted to be a chandelier. It is a painful thing to look at your family's branch grafted onto a tree you did not plant. It is worse to look away. Max made a stack of affidavits and blank affidavits. He said when the time is right, the cashier or the bartender or the clerk at the check service might sign one if asked properly by an officer of the court. He said he knew which questions not to ask, so the signatures would still matter later. We paused when the air changed in the room. Afternoon had shifted to that color where the day decides whether it will storm. Max flipped a page and a corner of dust lifted from the folder and drifted through the light. It looked like ash for a second. Paper tells the truth when you handle it long enough. I watched it fall. I let the metaphor stand where it landed and said nothing because a man does not need to narrate what already speaks. The first drops hit the window while we traced connections on a legal pad. Max held a pen above a name and waited. He likes the client to draw the next line when it is their own life. I took the pen and drew a thin route from Family Legal Trust to the cashier's checks to a deposit at a bank that shared a building with Arcadia. He murmured a small sound that was not quite approval and not quite surprise. The sound a person makes when a piece fits exactly where it belongs. He made another call, this one to a clerk who handles filings a few towns over. She confirmed a sealed complaint that often signals a domestic action. Dates intersect. He wrote a date in the margin. I wrote a circle around it. When rain begins, you think it will pass in minutes. Then it remembers where the mountains sit and decides to stay. We walked to the window. The rain came hard and clean, the first of the season, the kind that knocks dust out of the air and leaves nonsense sticking to the sidewalk where everyone can see it. We stood like two people deciding if they remembered how to enjoy that sound. Max said, "I like a storm that shows its work." I said, "Me too." He asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him nothing leaves this room. I told him we collect, we verify, we store, we hold the line. He reminded me that patience is not the same as delay. Patience is pressure applied over time. He has the look of a man who once waited in a car for hours to watch a door that did not open. He respects silence better than most. I asked for one more thing. Find the precise path of one transfer Harriet flagged last week. It left our household, ran through meadow, and ended somewhere that announced itself as family in a way that made a person's guard drop. Max folded a map of the city and slid his finger along a street that holds offices for things that prefer nice names. He said, "Give me until morning." I said, "Take the time you need and use the time you take." On the way down the stairs, the locksmith was drilling a fresh cylinder for a customer who had lost a key. The sound bit clean into the hallway. The smell of ground metal and rain mixed into something like relief. I thought of doors and who holds them, and how a key is just a story you tell metal until it agrees to turn. At home, the house had that washed silence a storm leaves behind. Clara's car was in the drive, the blue too bright under wet light. I walked past it without a glance because some things are better studied from paper than from the eyes when you have work to finish. Inside, the counters were wiped and a glass sat upside down to dry, the small choreography of order. It trembles less than people do. I took Max's folders into my office and set them down. When the top one slipped an inch, a thin breath of dust rose and fell back gray against the wood. Dust like ash. Past tense, catching up to the present. I opened the folder and moved carefully, page over page, fingerprint over fingerprint, until the pile felt like a spine that would not bend. In the next room, a phone chimed. Not my ring. A message I was not meant to hear. I let it pass through the air like weather and returned to the work that heals a mind. I made labels for each segment of the path. Marker payments, check services, trust label, Arcadia, law partner, building floor. One line at a time until the shape told its own story back to me. The rain tapped the window in a steady rhythm, pages turning over the sound, a duet I did not know I missed. I wrote the time in the corner of the top sheet. I wrote one sentence beneath it in Harriet's style, small and deliberate. Weak soil identified. Do not pour until compacted. I closed the folder and rested my palm there, not to claim it, just to let my skin memorize the weight of facts. Patience is a weapon they underestimate. It asks nothing. It just waits beside truth with the door unlocked, confident that the person who betrayed your house will eventually walk through carrying his own proof. The rain softened. The room brightened a shade. I left the folders where the light could find them in the morning and listened to the last drops fall like a clock that only tells one kind of time. The kind where you do not chase, you prepare. And when the ground stops moving under their feet, you let them feel why. She came not as a daughter, but as a judge. I knew it the moment she stepped through the doorway and did not reach for a hug. Her eyes did a slow survey of the way careful people do when they need the room to tell them the truth before anyone else does. She closed the door and stood with her hands in her coat pockets, breathing evenly like she had practiced it. The house kept its ordinary sounds. Refrigerator hum, a valve ticking in the wall after the storm. The calm after rain carries its own kind of weight. I asked if she wanted tea. She shook her head once and walked to the table. The old blueprint tube sat off to the side and the compass lay in the center where I had left it last night. She touched the rim of the compass with her index finger and looked at me as if asking whether we were going to make this official. I sat across from her so the circle of glass was between us. The needle kept a clean line. She waited for me to speak. I decided not to fill the air with apologies. I could not back up with evidence. She took a breath and went first. Mom says you're shutting her out, that you changed things without warning. Her voice was measured, not hostile, just collecting. I said I changed how access works so that no one moves what they do not own. She did not blink. She asked whether there was something I hadn't told her. I said there was, and that I would rather she hear it than read about it later. She looked down at the compass and traced a small circle in the dust around its base. She came with a folder under her arm. When she slid it onto the table, papers fanned like cards. At the top, I saw forms printed from the county website. Petition language. Drafts. Not filed. Not signed. Seeing them did not shock me. That is not how shock works. How? The body recognizes what the mind has already met at a distance. She tapped the forms once and then slid them aside. I will not file until I know the whole thing. I nodded and reached for my phone. Not the ledger, not the folders, just the device that had become a vault whether I liked it or not. I scrolled past messages I did not need to reread and found the clip. I kept it short. I pressed play and set the phone beside the compass. Once he signs, it's done. The voice wore confidence like a suit. He still thinks love means loyalty. The second voice lowered itself to tenderness and missed. I stopped the clip. Silence wiped the countertop clean. Lydia did not look away from the compass. She swallowed hard and set her palm flat on the table like you steady yourself on a moving train. Her jaw moved once barely. She asked how long I had known. 6 days, I said. She nodded slowly, counting inside rather than out loud. You could have told me sooner. You had to hear it yourself. She covered her mouth with her hand and I saw the smallest shake in her wrist. Not the kind that breaks a person. The kind that announces a new balance point. She sat back and stared through me, not at me over my shoulder, at a place memories go when they rearrange themselves. I thought of the night she was 9 and lost a tooth at the dinner table and would not cry because she did not want to frighten her mother. Courage has a quiet shape, and it looks like that. She asked if Mom knew I had heard. I said she suspected after I set new locks on the bank. She asked if Dylan knew. I said he came to my office to sell me safety wrapped as a procedure. She did not flinch at his name. She said the next sentence without makeup. He's been different. He asks questions and then acts like he never asked. He calls it planning. He uses words like simplify and streamline as if my life were a drawer to be organized. The needle stayed true. The light from the window caught the compass face in a scratch I had never noticed. A thin scar that only shows when the angle is right. I told her I had put formalities in place with people who know how to use them. She said, "You built a frame before the storm." I said I did not build the storm. She leaned forward. "Tell me everything, but only what matters." The training in her voice had returned, the one that makes space for difficult stories and asks them to behave. I told her about Harriet's lines on the ledger about the shapes money made when it tried to pass for something else, about names that sounded like charity and meant custody. I did not say the name of the place with the markers. I did not need to. That is a separate fact for a different day. She will learn what belongs to her to learn. She reached for the compass and turned it a quarter inch so the light fell differently and the needle did not flicker at all. She fixed her gaze on it while she spoke. "I want to understand my part. I want to know where I stood while this happened." I told her standing is not guilt. She said maybe it is if you stand too near a door and let the wrong person through. I said your job is not a doorman, your job is daughter. Her throat tightened and relaxed like a muscle remembering its work. She asked if the clip was all. I said there was more, and that I would share it if she was ready for what it would do to her mind. She shook her head. "Not yet, not now. The short piece is enough." It contained the virus and the cure in 12 words. She exhaled through her nose, wiped one eye with the side of her finger, and smiled the way people smile when the corner of a room they thought was square turns out not to be. We sat like that, the way two people sit when the room becomes a courtroom without the wood and the bailiff. She asked what I needed from her. The sentence was simple, and it carried the weight of a bridge. I said I did not need a defense. I needed honesty. She said, "You have it." And then she asked herself something I could not hear and found an answer she did not like. She reached for the folder again, pulled out a single page, and tore it slowly along the fold. The sound felt like a zipper closing on a chapter she would not reopen. When she spoke again, her voice had speed in it. He asked to see my calendar. He said his assistant could handle billing if I gave him access, just to help, just to lighten the load. He wanted my passwords. He said he would never use them without asking. He smiled like he did in the wedding photos. He made ordinary sound like rescue. I said, "Did you give him any?" She shook her head. He doesn't know I counted them twice before I said no. She laughed once without joy. Mom would call that stubborn. I call it the day my spine learned how to turn steel. I told her there would be noise when boundaries meet people who treat other people like paperwork. I told her the noise would call itself concern and justice and family. I told her our job was to recognize what a bell was and what a siren was. She held my words without argument. Then she asked if we could make a list. Not a plan. A list of facts, dates, names, who said what moved where. She wanted the ledger in her hand so her mind had something to hold besides images it did not want. I brought Harriet's copies from the office and laid them out like tiles. We moved through them the way you move through a room when you are showing someone where the floor dips. Her finger stopped at a transfer she did not recognize. "That one," she said. "Meadow." "What is that?" I told her. "It wears a soft name and does hard work for people who need their movements to look smaller than they are." She stared at the circle Harriet had drawn around it and pressed her lips together. "He told me once he hated the outdoors. Too much dirt," he said. She tapped the circle. "He found plenty." Words started coming faster. She asked about the bank protocol changes and whether she would be caught in the net when she paid for groceries. I told her I set separate confirmation paths for her card and could add whatever she needed. She asked if I was steady enough to stand in a courtroom if it came to that. I said steadier than I feel. She said that was the right answer. Then the pace shifted. You could hear it in our breathing. A decision was made to get dressed in the next room. Lydia placed both hands on the table and leaned into the compass as if aligning herself with a north she had been borrowing. She said, "I am done pretending I do not see." I nodded because anything else would have set her back. She gathered the draft forms, kept one, and slid the rest toward me. She did not need them anymore for whatever she needed to decide. She stood, and I stood with her. She walked to the door and stopped like she had remembered something. "You loved her," she said without a question mark. I said I did, and that loving and defending are not always cousins. She looked at my face like it was a blueprint from a house she once lived in and could still navigate in the dark. Then she said the thing that unhooked something I did not know was still caught. "I love you, and I choose the truth. If it hurts in the right direction." We stepped onto the front step, and the world smelled like wet concrete and relief. The sky had broken into soft pieces of blue. A breeze ran down the street like a messenger late to the story. Lydia tucked the folder under her arm, but one loose page had slipped free. The wind took it and tugged it from her fingers. We watched it lift and tumble and come to rest against the tire of her old car. The one I helped her buy 10 years ago with cash counted slowly at a kitchen table. She jogged down and picked it up and laughed a small, honest sound that did not cover anything. She stood by the car door and looked back at me. "You'll be okay." I said I already am more okay than I was last week. She nodded and opened the door. Before she got in, she leaned across the roof and spoke the line a judge delivers when the courtroom has done what it came to do. "I'll take it from here." She drove away with her window down, and the air took the last of the damp from her hair. I stood there until the tail lights turned into an ordinary red dot and vanished at the corner. In the kitchen, the table still held the compass and a faint ring where a cup had sat earlier. The compass needle did not waver. The light through the window hit the glass square and returned it to the ceiling in a soft square that looked like a seal on a letter you do not have to open to know what it says. Truth does not only divide. Sometimes it hands two people a key to the rooms they were meant to live in all along. I palmed the compass and placed it back on its spot dead center. Then I cleared the table of papers except one list of dates and names, not to cling to them, but to remember who we are when the door opens again. The house settled with that quiet you get in the hour before evening. It sounded like freedom learning how to speak in a home that finally let it. In court, silence weighs more than words. I felt that before the judge even entered, in the scrape of chairs and the paper-thin coughs people use when they do not want to be seen needing air. The hallway had smelled like floor polish and old resolve. Inside, the clock kept time. You could hear it. Lydia sat behind me where family sits when they decide to stop pretending. Harriet and Max took a row near the aisle. Cynthia touched my arm once, a light tap, the way an instructor taps a wing before a flight. The bailiff called the case. Names rang out and folded back into the wood. We stood. Across the aisle, Clara kept her chin high and her eyes low, the look of a person trying to borrow strength from posture. Dylan leaned in to whisper to the lawyer. He brought a man with a perfect knot in his tie and a folder that looked new. When he looked up, his mouth held a smile that wanted to be confident and landed on rehearsal. Opposing counsel went first. He told a story about a husband who controlled a household narrowed to one key, a woman who feared being left without necessities. He used modest words and made them heavy. He said emergency relief was required to prevent harm. He asked for temporary control of accounts, temporary support, and temporary narratives that never want to be temporary once they stand. My attorney let him finish without interruption. James Vega speaks like a carpenter measures square and plane. He stood, thanked the court, and began with the thing I had learned to respect most in the last week: facts. He placed 3 exhibits on the lectern in a line: a bank's access log, a ledger summary with dates and amounts, a notice to an entity with a gentle name confirming a failed transfer. He did not change tone when he said those names. He did not need to. The judge looked from paper to person and back. She asked one question about the purpose of the bank changes. James answered without ornament. Risk mitigation, Your Honor. Neutral protocols requiring in-person identity applied across all joint instruments triggered by documented third-party inquiries. He did not add adjectives. He let the nouns work. Opposing counsel tried to frame it as a pattern of punishment. The judge held up a hand, not impatient, just enough to put gravity back where it belonged. She asked if there was anything further from the defense besides the argument. James nodded and said there was. He turned to the gallery. Harriet walked to the stand, swore, and sat. Her testimony took 4 minutes and changed the temperature of the room. She spoke in the same tidy cadence she uses to reconcile books. She described the access alerts, the third-party contact without ownership authority. The auto draft was created for a trustee label that did not serve the household. She said the words verify and documented enough times to make them into anchor points, and then she stepped down. Max followed. He did not offer an opinion. He described routes. Public records linking cashier's checks to a building where trust labels live. A list of dates that matched a gaming board's filings redacted to protect what the public does not need. He said the names of clerks who would sign statements for a court if asked correctly. He did not say Dylan's name until James asked him to confirm a photograph. He confirmed without raising his voice. Opposing counsel objected at each junction, and the judge ruled 1 objection sustained, 2 overruled, and then told both sides to keep their hands off the theater. The room learned what kind of morning it was going to be. James glanced at me. I nodded. He asked permission to play a short audio clip for authentication purposes. Opposing counsel stood to object again. The judge tilted her head a fraction. Foundation. James laid it with 3 stones. Date, device, chain of custody. He did not say discovery the way some attorneys do when they want to wear the word as armor. He just described the path a file takes when you treat it like evidence instead of a weapon. The judge allowed it within a narrow lane. The clerk wheeled the small speaker closer to the bench. James handed up a transcript with timestamps and kept his finger on the line that mattered. He pressed play. Once he signs, it's done. Dylan's voice entered the room like it had papers of its own. He still thinks love means loyalty. Clara's reply carried that practiced softness I have come to recognize as another kind of steel. James stopped the clip. The judge did not look at me or at Clara right away. She looked at the paper in front of her as if it were deciding something. Opposing counsel asked to strike. He said context. He said hearsay. James said party admission and co-conspirator statements in furtherance. The judge sat very still. The clock on the wall needed oil. The bailiff took 1 step that sounded like a wooden metronome. The judge ruled that the court would consider the clip for credibility and intent, not for all that the parties might hope or fear. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Clara's lawyer leaned in close to her and spoke words that moved only the corner of his mouth. Dylan stared at the table, then at the door, then at his hands. He found his smile again and set it on his face like a tool he did not know how to operate under pressure. James asked to approach with 1 more item, a single-page summary from the bank that handled the trustee label. The judge read it and did something I did not expect. She looked at me, then held my eyes for 3 beats and looked away. Not sympathy, recognition. She turned to opposing counsel and asked if he would like to be heard on the item. He tried. She stopped him on sentence 2 and told him that the court knew what words sound like when they arrive without supporting weight. She returned to James. Anything further? He shook his head. He put his hand flat on the lectern for a second, not to steady himself, but the way people touch wood to remember they work with something that has grain. The judge took a breath and leaned forward. On petitions for emergency orders, she said the law requires both evidence of actual harm and a pattern that suggests continuation. What I've heard is a pattern, yes, but not the one the petitioner hoped to establish. I hear a person taking measured steps to prevent unauthorized access. I hear conversations that undermine the trust the petition claims to defend. She looked down at the clip transcript and then up again. Temporary control of the marital accounts is denied. Any pending changes not authorized in person by Mr. Cole are vacated. The court orders both parties to refrain from altering asset structures without mutual consent or further order. Opposing counsel began to speak. She raised 1 finger, and he stopped. She turned to Dylan. And counsel, you are not a party here, but the record reflects your involvement in the planning and other matters touched by testimony. The court will refer the relevant portions of this file to the appropriate oversight bodies for whatever they deem proper. She tapped the folder with the back of her pen. If there is nothing further, we are done. James stood. Your Honor, 1 housekeeping request. The court's leave to file under seal the bank confirmations to protect account numbers. Granted, she said, already reaching for the gavel. Luotsu leaned close to me and whispered the question that belonged to him by ritual and to me by choice. Mr. Cole, would you like to comment? I kept my eyes on the bench where the clip transcript lay. No, the recording already did. The gavel fell once. The sound carried like a clean cut through a board. A murmur rose and fell and then folded itself into feet and doors and hands collecting pens. Lydia put her palm on my shoulder, just a touch, just a yes. We filed out into a corridor that pretended to be the same corridor as the one we entered. It wasn't. The sky beyond the glass had traded glare for a soft gray I had not noticed moving in. Reporters did not appear. Grand speeches did not occur. Harriet nodded once from down the hall and turned to the stairs. Max waited by the elevator and handed me a small envelope without words. Inside were cards with names of clerks he knew would take a call if the next chapter required signatures. Clara stood 10 feet away with her arms crossed, face tilted toward a window that reflected a version of her that had not expected this morning. Dylan spoke into his phone, then stopped, then started again, then slid the device into his pocket like it had betrayed him. His lawyer patted his elbow. A gesture that looks like comfort and is often the first step toward a conversation about retainers and limits. I did not approach either of them. There is nothing to say to a bridge you are not going to cross again. Lydia and I walked to the parking lot in the slow press of people remembering where they parked. A light rain began, the kind that does not announce itself, only reveals itself on glass. When I sat behind the wheel, the drops streaked the windshield in lines that looked like lines on a page when ink runs. I did not start the engine right away. The courthouse steps filled the rear view, then blurred. I reached into my jacket and set the brass compass on the dash, not as a flourish, just as a habit that had become a choice. The needle did not twitch. It lay still, certain in a way that does not require witness. I touched the glass with one finger and watched the rain draw small rivers around that touch and continue down. Lydia was in the seat beside me, quiet in the way you are when language owes you nothing. She turned the compass so its face caught a sliver of gray light and smiled without teeth. "You okay?" she said. I said yes in a way that carried both relief and the ache of something that died the dignified way a thing dies when you stop feeding it. She nodded and looked forward again. We drove out of the lot slowly, the wipers making their small arcs, the sound soft enough to pass for breathing. The radio stayed off. I did not want other people's noise. At the corner, we waited for a pedestrian who did not hurry, and I found myself grateful for his pace. Some days need a stranger to move exactly how they move. At the light, I caught my reflection in the side window and saw a man who had brought a room full of paper and silence and left with both intact. Some victories arrive with horns and flags. Others come as a clear path where there wasn't one an hour earlier. What I heard as the tires rolled through the wet was not celebration. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't vanish when you open a door. No justice is louder than the silence of the person who was right all along. The rain kept time on the glass, and the compass did not argue. I took the turn toward home and let the wipers return to their slowest speed. The needle stayed true. The road did too. And for once, the two agreed. The desert hasn't changed. Only I have. Morning opens the same way it always has out here, with light that does not hurry and air that smells faintly of dust and mesquite. I sit on the tailgate with a thermos and watch the sky trade gray for the kind of blue that insists on clarity. The sight is quiet except for a dove on the fence and the soft tick of a cooling engine. Framed walls rise in rows like sentences not yet finished. I run a hand across a stud and feel the dry grain catch my palm. Wood still tells the truth when you listen. I come early now because the first hour belongs to thinking you can trust. I string a chalk line and watch the blue snap to the floor like a promise kept. The crew will be here soon, veterans mostly, and a few kids with tool belts that hang too loosely on their hips. We build small houses with porches that face each other so neighbors have a reason to say good morning. Nothing grand, just rooms that fit and doors that swing without complaint. I climb the stepladder and check a header for level. The bubble lands where it should, and I feel something inside me land too. Not victory, something quieter, a kind of peace that holds its ground without needing a witness. At the edge of the lot, the cottonwoods are still damp from last night. When the light hits them, they shine like they are thinking of water even in a dry place. My phone stays in the truck. I do not need it to tell me what matters today. Clara lives somewhere across town with a life that looks like it belongs to someone I once knew and no longer recognize. I wish her a gentleness I could not give her from under the same roof. Dylan has meetings I do not attend and explanations I do not have to hear. Their names no longer rise in my chest like weather. They pass like distant traffic. Lydia sleeps later on Saturdays now that she keeps her own calendar again. When she laughs, it sounds like our kitchen in the old days when a recipe worked and the room smelled like cinnamon. I let that be enough. By 8, the crew pulls in, boots on gravel, greetings that do not need to be loud. I put on my belt and walk the line with Ortiz, who runs the electrical volunteers. He taps a stud and says we need another inch on that run or the inspector will frown. I nod and shift the mark with my pencil. We move in rhythm without talking much. There is comfort in tools speaking the way they always have. A drill spins, a saw warms, two hammers find the same beat and share it like old friends. When the sun clears the roofline of the church across the street, I step into the shade of the future living room and look out through the empty frame where a window will sit. The lot across the lane holds two finished houses, fresh paint, small porch lights that look like they want to come on before supper. A woman waters a strip of buffalo grass with a hose set to mist, and a boy rides a scooter in slow arcs around her feet. He waves when he sees me. I raise my hand and wave back. The scooter clicks on a seam in the driveway and he laughs and circles to hit it again. Some sounds you never want to fix. Around midday, a car door shuts at the curb and I know the way it sounds before I see who stepped out. Lydia walks toward me carrying something wrapped in a square of cloth. No hurry in her step, no ceremony either. Just a face that has stopped pretending and learned to rest. She reaches the slab and stops under the frame. The breeze lifts a corner of the cloth and I see brass. She smiles. I found a shop that still cleans old instruments, she says. They were gentle with it. She unwraps the compass and sets it in my palm. The glass is clear now. The scratch that caught the light has been polished to a soft line that only shows if you go looking for it. The needle holds north with a patience I wish I had learned sooner. For a moment I think of my father's thumb on this same face and I have to steady my breath so memory does not take more than it should. You rebuilt everything, she says. Not everything, just what mattered. We stand like that with the compass between us and the sight around us busying itself with sawdust and small talk. She asks if she can help. I hand her a pencil and point to a stack of trim that needs measuring. She grins and tucks the pencil behind her ear the way her mother used to when a drawing lived on our kitchen table. History is a circle if you draw it too tightly. Today it feels more like a road that bends but does not fold back on itself. We work quietly for a while. Lydia marks the trim lengths and calls them out and I cut them true. She wipes each piece with a cloth and stacks it as if setting a table for company. The crew takes a water break against the fence. Someone tells a joke that lands gently. Ortiz wanders over and asks if the compass has found its bearings. Lydia holds it up and the sun paints a coin of light on her cheek. Looks like it, she says. Later we eat sandwiches sitting on buckets in the shade. Most of the conversation is about the material drop we are waiting on and the weather and a game on the radio that no one really cares about. A man who wears his fatigue like a jacket tells Lydia this will be a good street to walk at night because the porches are close and the lights spill onto the sidewalk. She nods and says that it is on purpose. He nods back and sips from his bottle like a person remembering something they left behind and might find again. When the last wrapper goes in the trash bag and the thermoses are put away, I tell Lydia I have a place for the compass if she agrees. She tilts her head. Where? The community room, I say. North wall. She looks at the nearly finished room behind us with its fresh drywall and unpainted trim and windows that frame the sky like a postcard. She nods slowly. Yes, that is good. We carry a short ladder and a small frame I built from offcuts of oak. The wood is plain. The corners are clean. I hold the frame while Lydia sets the compass within it like a lens. The fit is snug without being cruel. She runs a finger along the edge to make sure it sits. Then she steps back. I mark the spot on the wall where the light will find it in late afternoon. A pencil dot, a small hole, an anchor set with a turn of the wrist, a screw tightened until resistance speaks. I lift the frame and hang it. The compass settles. The needle points. The room changes a fraction in ways only a builder notices. A fixed thing that was once carried in a pocket now names a direction for anyone who walks through with their head up. Lydia stands under it and closes one eye like a photographer. The room does not need a picture. It is one. She reaches out and taps the glass with the softest touch. It makes a sound like a quiet bell that no one ordered and everyone was waiting to hear. She wipes a thumbprint I do not see and nods. That is north, she says. I say it is. We do not talk about what comes for others. We do not give their choices more ink than they already stole. We talk about paint colors for a room where people will gather when the heat breaks off in the evening. We talk about a bookshelf along the west wall and a table where kids can spread homework without being told to move. Lydia says she can bring a box of paperbacks from her office. I say I will ask the lumberyard for scrap plywood to make games. Ordinary plans that add up to something larger than the day. The crew filters back to work and the site fills with sound again. I feel the old urge to manage every detail soften. I step outside and let the sun find the compass through the window. A ribbon of light crosses the floor and rests at my boots. I think of how revenge tried to be the point for a few hot hours and how understanding arrived instead and refused to leave. A better builder always checks the soil before he pours. I am still learning that. The desert says no hurry. It is not going anywhere. Neither am I. Mid-afternoon. We set the last piece of trim and sweep the floor. For the first time it will be swept. The room smells like pine and gypsum, and the brief sweet smell of a candy wrapper someone forgot to put in the bag. Lydia leans her shoulder against the north wall and watches dust float through the rectangle of sun. She says she can breathe here. I say that is the whole point. She pulls a small cloth from her pocket and gives the compass one last polish. Then she leaves the cloth folded on the windowsill the way you might leave a note where someone will find it when they need it. She takes my hand and squeezes once. Neither of us needs a speech. We have had enough speeches for several lifetimes. We walk out into the light without looking back and circle the house once before she heads for her car. At the curb, she turns and calls the line that will carry me when the site is quiet again. See you tomorrow. A promise has never needed more words. After the last truck pulls away, I lock the tool chest and sit on the step. The heat slides off the concrete in waves you can see if you let your eyes soften. A dog barks 2 streets over. A screen door opens. Someone laughs low. Daylight leans toward evening. I stand and go back inside one more time. The room holds still. The compass shines. The needle points where it always wanted to point. I rest my fingertips at the edge of the frame and feel the faint vibration of the building settling around it as if the place itself were taking a breath. I cross to the far wall and mark where a bookshelf will go next week. I write the measurements on the fresh primer and draw a short line to remind myself where the studs run. Then I step back through the doorway and down onto the dust and gravel and make my way to the street. I turn once at the gate. The north wall holds its small circle of brass like a heart. The camera in my head pulls back without asking. Roof lines line up, porches wait. A road leads away and does not insist on speed. When I climb into the truck, the seat keeps the shape of me like an old friend. I do not turn on the radio. I do not call anyone. I pull away slowly and let the sun in the mirror shrink to a warm square in the corner. The compass will sleep on that wall now and tell the next person the same thing it told me until I learned it for good. Find your north. Trust it. Build there. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.